Chapter 18 of Mary's Grammar by Jane MARCET. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jennifer Dallman. Continuation of verbs. Lesson 12, Participles. The following morning, when Mary went to her mother for her lesson, she said, "Well, Mamma, we have not done with the verbs yet, have we?" "Oh, no," replied her mother. "Far from it. Besides the four modes, there belongs to a verb two words called participles, because they partake of the quality of the adjective as well as the verb. The participles of the verb to dance are dancing, danced. The first is called the active participle, the second the passive participle." "I think," said Mary, "they should be called the present and the past participles, for dancing is the present time and dance the past." "But what have they to do with adjectives, Mamma?" "The participles are often used as adjectives. Did you never hear of a dancing bear?" "Oh, yes, dancing is an adjective there, because it shows the quality of the bear. You may say a learned man, and learned, besides an adjective, is a passive participle of the verb to learn. But when these participles are used as verbs, how can you put pronouns before them? You cannot say, I dancing, he dancing, they dancing." "No," replied her mother. "When the participle is used as a verb, you require the help of another verb, as you will see by and by. Now try to find me out some participles, Mary." "Going, Mamma, is not that the active participle of the verb to go?" Her mother nodded assent. "Well, Mamma, I will now act the two participles," and she walked deliberately towards the door. "I suppose that means going, Mary." "Yes," said Mary, who then opened the door, and walking out of the room, said, "Now I am gone." That is the passive participle. Presently she came back tripping into the room, and said, "Now I am a-coming." "A coming?" repeated her mother, affecting surprise. "What sort of thing can that be?" "It is not a thing, Mamma. It is an active participle of the verb to come." "No, indeed," replied her mother. "Pray, what part of speech is a?" Mary, pleased that she recollected what it was, began repeating from her grammar. "A is an article put before a noun," when her mother interrupted her, saying, "If a is an article placed before a noun, coming must be a noun, and I never saw or heard of such a thing as a coming. It is very natural that I should wonder what it can be. Can you tell me whether it is a person or a thing?" Mary tried to laugh when she discovered that her mamma was joking, but she could not, for she was vexed at the blunder she had made. "Well," continued her mother, seeing Mary look grave, "we will joke no more. Coming, it is true, is the present participle of the verb to come, but then you must not put an article before it, Mary, or you will make me fancy it is a noun. I have given you a little lesson about it, which I am sure you will remember. It is a very common error saying a coming and a going, but it is always bad grammar to put an article before a participle. Well, now that you are acquainted with the participles and the four modes of a verb, let me hear if you can conjugate one." "What is conjugate, Mamma?" "It is to repeat a verb through, with its persons, its tenses, its modes, and its participles." "As we did the verb to dance?" "Yes, but the conjugation was not complete, as you were not acquainted with the participles. Try to repeat the verb to go." Mary stood upright before her mother, and with a look of great attention said, "To go. That is the infinitive mode. Then comes the indicative, the present tense of which is I go, we go, thou goest, you go, he goes, they go. Now for the past tense. I goed, thou goest." "Oh, Mamma!" exclaimed she, "that will never do. I am sure that goed is wrong. What is the past tense?" "Indeed, Mary, I shall not tell you. You must find it out yourself." "Let me see," said Mary. "I should not say that I goed out yesterday, but that I went out yesterday. But can went be the past time of the verb to go?" "It is indeed, Mary. How very strange, Mamma. Went and go are not the least alike. One is as long again as the other, and they have not a single letter the same." "This shows," replied her mother, "that the verb is irregular, that is to say, that in its conjugation it does not follow the common rules. Now go on." Mary went on with the past tense. "I went, we went, thou wentest, you went, He went. They went. Now comes the future tense. I remember the signs of it are shall or will. I shall go. We shall go. Thou shalt go. You shall go. He shall go. They shall go. I am quite glad to return to the verb to go. In the subjunctive and imperative modes, said her mother, go is also used. Mary went on. I may or might or could go. We may go. Thou mayest go. You may go. He may go. They may go. Then the imperative mode is let me go. Let us go. Go thou. Go you. Let him go. Let them go. And lastly, the participles are going and gone. I was very near saying goed, Mamma, but I recollected just in time. If the verb had been regular, said her mother, the past tense and the passive participle would have been goed. For in regular verbs, these are always the same and end in ed. In the verb to work, for instance, the past tense is worked, and the passive participle is worked also. Can you find out any regular verb by this method? I will try, Mamma. Let me see if the verb to write is regular. The past is, I wrote. Then it must be irregular, because it does not end in ed. Nor does the participle either, said her mother, for the participles are writing written. In the verb to talk, continued Mary, the past tense is talked. Now let us see what are the participles, talking and talked. That will do, Mamma, cried she, quite pleased at her success. To talk is a regular verb, and the verb to learn must be a regular verb also, for learned is both past tense and the past participle, and the verb to walk is regular also, Mamma. Well, that will do, Mary. You have found out examples enough to make you remember the rule. Oh, but do let me find out a few irregular verbs. She thought a little, and then said, to give is irregular, for the past is gave and the participle given, and the verb to feel, though I do not know, she added, for the past is felt, and the participle is felt too, so they are the same. But they do not end in ed, said her mother. Therefore it is irregular. The irregular are almost as numerous as the regular verbs. But we have had verbs enough today, Mary, so put on your bonnet and take a run in the garden. The rival friends. Susan and Lucy were two friends who went to the same school. Every year the scholars were examined by the ladies of the neighborhood who superintended the school, and 3 prizes were given. The first was for the best girl in the school, the second for the best scholar, and the third for her who had attended the school most regularly. Susan stood no chance of having this last prize, for her mother having been ill for some months past, she had often been obliged to stay home to assist in the household affairs and to take care of the younger children. But she was a girl of such excellent disposition, so attentive to her poor sick mother, so careful of her brothers and sisters, and so kind and good-tempered that everyone wished and expected her to gain the first prize. Lucy was a clever girl. She had a remarkably good memory, and she understood and took pleasure in what she learnt. She wished Susan to gain the first prize, because she loved her dearly, and she felt pretty certain of having the second herself. She was ambitious of being thought the cleverest girl in the school, and then she knew that it was more easy to outstrip Susan in learning than in goodness. At length, the day of the examination arrived. The children were all neatly dressed in their Sunday clothes, and accompanied by their mothers to the school. Susan was sadly grieved that her mother was too unwell to go with her, but her mother kissed her at parting and said, "Come back, Susan, with the prize you deserve, and that will do me more good than all the doctor's physic." These words pleased Susan, because she hoped to gain this prize, for though she had a very modest opinion of her own merits, her schoolfellows had so often told her that not one of them stood any chance against her, that she could not help thinking that they might be right. When the children were assembled in the schoolroom, they saw the 3 prizes hung in full view. The first was a piece of neat pink and white printed calico for a frock, the second a straw bonnet trimmed with blue ribbons, and the third a shawl of small Indian pattern. This 3rd prize was to be given first. The ladies who superintended the school examined the books and found that Eliza Hawkins had attended the greatest number of times. The prize was therefore given to her, accompanied by a few words of praise, and she returned to her place much pleased. The second prize was to be gained by a trial of skill, and as the girls of the lower class had no chance of attaining it, exercises of writing and spelling were given to them, with some lesser rewards provided for those who performed the task best. The beautiful straw bonnet was to be worn by the best scholar of the highest class. Susan and Lucy sat beside each other on the same form, in anxious expectation. A subject was given them for a theme, which they were to write. This was the exercise on which Lucy felt so sure of success. Half an hour was allowed them for the task, during which time no intercourse was allowed between the children, and they were to keep perfect silence. The subject was the discovery of America. The girls all took up their pens and began cogitating in their minds and ransacking their memories to know what they should write. Susan wrote all she could recollect about Columbus's voyage across unknown seas, the danger he ran of being forced by his crew to return, of the delight he felt when he first discovered land, and the reception he met with from the savages of the new country. She had got so far when she heard Lucy exclaim in a low whisper, "What shall I do? I can't recollect the man's name. Oh, Susan, help me!" Susan was astonished. She had expected Lucy to produce by far the best account of America, but poor Lucy could do nothing while her mind was confused and bewildered by trying to recollect the name. Susan, in her anxiety to relieve her, transgressed the rules of the school. She wrote on a small slip of paper, "Christopher Columbus," and pushed it under the long desk on which they were writing to her companion, who eagerly seized it and began writing with great earnestness, and went on with such alacrity that though 10 minutes of the time allowed was already past, at the end of the half hour not only was her theme ready, but it was decidedly superior to any of the others, and the prize was given to her. Mrs. Staunton, one of the ladies, put the bonnet on Lucy and tied it under her chin. All of the children admired the bonnet, but without envy. They knew that they had not the same claim of it that Lucy had, and looked pleased to see how well it became her. But no one was more sincerely glad of her success than Susan, though her own theme would have won a prize if Lucy had not outdone her. Lucy's color rose with delight and exultation, but when she looked at Susan, she thought of what she had done for her. Tears of gratitude stood in her eyes. She was impatient for the awarding of the first prize, which she now more than ever hoped it would be given to Susan. The moral conduct of several children then underwent an examination. Susan was declared to be the best girl of the school, and was called up to receive the prize. But before she could reach the spot, Mrs. Morley arose, and motioning with her hand that it should be replaced upon the table, said, "I regret to have anything to say against so good a girl as Susan, but it is my duty to report what I observed this morning." A written paper passed between Lucy and Susan during the time of the theme. "They are both to blame for breaking our rules, but it was so kind of Lucy to assist the only girl who was likely to be her rival, that we must excuse her fault. Besides, as Lucy's prize relates to learning only, this circumstance is unconnected with it. But it is otherwise with Susan," continued she, assuming a graver look, "and unless she can clear herself, she cannot deserve the prize of good conduct." Mrs. Morley, knowing that Lucy was the better scholar than Susan, had been led into the error of supposing that the paper she had seen pass between them came from Lucy instead of having it been given to her. During Mrs. Morley's speech, Lucy's color came and went. She breathed hard, and at length burst into tears. Susan, on the contrary, heard the accusation with composure, and determined not to disclose a secret which would deprive Lucy of her triumph. She therefore looked down, but made no answer. Everyone admired the warmth of feeling which Lucy showed for her friend, and were surprised and almost shocked at the indifference and silence of the latter. Susan had some hope, it is true, that Lucy would come forward and reveal the truth, but though Lucy dearly loved her friend, she had not courage, in the moment of victory, to clear her at her own expense, and therefore contented herself with grieving for her, but without speaking. Foolish girl! She little thought how much her character would have risen if she had at once done justice to Susan, and how utterly despised she would be if the truth should be discovered in any other manner. Susan's silence was considered as an admission of her guilt, and the prize of good conduct was given to another girl. Lucy could contain her feelings no longer. She went up to Susan, kissed her with warmth and tenderness, took the bonnet off her own head and put it on her friend, saying, "It is yours, Susan." But Susan disclaimed it. Mrs. Staunton thought that Lucy carried her grief for the disappointment of her friend too far. "Her fault is not great," she said, "and I regret that, occurring at this moment, it should deprive her of the prize. How much more bitter Susan's feelings would have been, if by the assistance you gave her had deprived you of the prize." These words, instead of consoling Lucy, did but increase her grief, for it was she that felt the bitter remorse which Mrs. Staunton spoke of. She hung upon Susan's neck in an agony of grief. Susan whispered to her, "Speak out, Lucy, and it will be all over. I say so as much for your sake as for my own." "I cannot," replied Lucy. "I dare not face such shame. But do you speak for me?" And then, dreading to hear what Susan would say, she ran out of the schoolroom. Poor Susan knew not what to do. If Lucy had herself confessed the truth, it would have atoned for her conduct. But for Susan to make the disclosure would be far from producing the same effect. Besides, it might appear as if she were taking advantage of Lucy's absence to clear herself at the expense of her friend. She determined, therefore, to say nothing, and distressed by the look of wonder and disappointment which was fixed on her by all present, she begged leave to go home. Her tears, which had hitherto restrained, fell in abundance when she beheld her mother's pale countenance, and knew that she had brought back nothing to do her good. But this was not the case, for no sooner had she told all that had passed, than her mother's anxious look was changed into a cheerful smile. She kissed Susan, and told her that she doubly deserved the prize, and that it was better than bringing it home. Besides, she said, "I am sure that when Lucy knows that you have not spoken for her, she will speak out for herself." "Oh, but you will keep my secret, dear mother," said Susan. "Yes," replied her mother, "whatever you confide in me, I consider as sacred." Susan's mother was right in her conjecture. As they were sitting on the porch of the farmhouse in the evening, they saw Lucy and her mother approach. Lucy had persuaded her mother not to go until it was nearly dark, that her shame might be less observed, and even then she slunk behind her mother as they drew near the house. "Lucy is come," said her mother, "to ask Susan's forgiveness, and to learn what passed at the school when her fault was known." "Her fault is not known," said Susan. "I could not betray her." Lucy felt all of Susan's kindness, but she dreaded the thoughts of having to make an avowal herself. Her mother insisted on it being done publicly. All those, she said, who saw her false glory must witness her shame. It is the only way she can atone for her conduct. The next day at the meeting of the Sunday school before church, Lucy confessed her fault and told everything that had passed. Susan, instead of triumphing in her innocence, looked so bashful that you might almost have supposed it was she who had done wrong, while Lucy's courage revived as she saw the pleasure that Susan's vindication gave to everyone. And when she came to tell how firmly Susan had resisted every temptation to betray her, she seemed to forget herself in the warmth of her feelings for her friend. But if Susan rose higher than ever in the good opinion of all, Lucy, by the frankness of her confession, regained their confidence, and instead of the shame and confusion by which she expected to be overwhelmed, she found her mind relieved from a heavy weight. The little girl who had received the prize of good conduct now came up and put it in Susan's hand, but Susan would not take it, and Mrs. Staunton desired the child to keep it, saying, "Susan has gained the affection and approbation of everyone. She wants no other reward." "Oh, but she must have the straw bonnet," said Lucy, with earnestness. Indeed, she must," and she put it on her head, and tied it so tight that Susan could not undo the knot. Susan looked distressed, but Mrs. Staunton said, "You cannot, Susan, refuse to give Lucy the pleasure of seeing you wear it." End of chapter 18.